Hi everyone, it's John. At the risk of becoming that guy on BookTube who shows you all of the books from his library that are from university presses, I'm here one more time to show you those books from my library that are from university presses. This is a special request from Peg over at the History Bookshelf, who has told me and reminded me that she wants to see more of these kinds of books because they tend to be books that are up our alley, maybe a bit more on the scholarly side, a little bit off the beaten path. That is, things we like to read. So in this video, I have 10 books for you. And in the spirit of what I did last time, I guess what was episode 1, here in episode 2, I will just, where there is a blurb on the back or the flap, I will read you the entire blurb instead of having to talk off the cuff about a book either I haven't read or have not read in several years, because I can't jog my memory that quickly. So a couple of these will actually be multi-volume books, so that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll go any more quickly, though. The first one I want to show you is something I think that didn't necessarily have to be printed by Princeton Press, Princeton University Press, but it was. I don't see why this couldn't be a perfectly good book for an everyday history publisher. This is, excuse the glare, The Italian Renaissance, Culture and Society in Italy by Peter Burke. And this is a Princeton paperback. In this newly revised edition of his widely acclaimed work, Peter Burke presents a social and cultural history of the Italian Renaissance. He discusses the social and political institutions that existed in Italy during the 15th and 16th centuries, and he analyzes the ways of thinking and seeing that characterize this period of extraordinary artistic creativity. Developing a distinctive approach, the author is concerned not only with the finished works of Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo da Vinci, and others, but also with the social background, patterns of recruitment, and means of subsistence of this cultural elite. He thus makes a major contribution both to our understanding of the Italian Renaissance and to our comprehension of the complex relations between culture and society. Peter Burke, as far as I know, is still around, and he wrote this book nearly 50 years ago. I think he published it in 1972. And for those unfamiliar with the sort of shape of trends in 20th century historiography, and I hope any professional historians, Hannah, if you're watching this, please call me out if this is wrong. I think this might be slightly different for European historiography than it is for American historiography. But as far as writing about Europe is concerned, this was really one of the first big works that considered not just the big artists, kings and queens, battles, the names of big philosophers and big ideas that you see all through history of Western civilization textbooks, but also considers things like modes of production, culture, how workers lived, things like more like micro-historical considerations. Obviously, he's mostly concerned here with artists, famous artists, but he is trying to reach down and see how those artists are connected with society at large. So there is a bit of an interest there, a hint at wanting to tie everything to more fundamental, maybe economic concerns. And if I remember correctly, I remember reading in the introduction that he is interested in kind of a Marxist analysis of the Italian Renaissance. I don't know if he himself is a Marxist or he just uses that as criticism. But there's book number 1. Book number 2, also, book number 2 and 3 go together. This is a multi-volume set. Here is my book with a sticker on it that tells you how much I paid for it. This is volume 1 of The Feudal Society by Marc Bloch. This is The Growth of Ties of Dependence. And there is no blurb on the back telling you what this book is about. It tells you a bit about Marc Bloch, who was born in 1886 and was executed by the Nazis in 1944. He is one of the towering figures of the Annales school of historiography. If you're not familiar with the Annales school, Annales. And this is, as far as medieval history goes, this is really a classic. Both volumes are. And as you can tell from the title of Volume 1, The Growth of Its Ties of Dependence, this is about the creation of feudal society, mostly in probably the 10th and 11th centuries, I'm guessing. I have not read this book, but I bought it a long time ago knowing that Marc Bloch is one of the seminal figures of medieval history in the early 20th century. And it's sort of sad, it's tremendously sad to think what else he could have written had he been able to escape Nazi capture. Volume 2 is social classes and political organization. These are the social classes and political organization that rise out of a uniquely feudal economy. So, once feudalism has sort of developed, what does culture and society look like in a feudal society? And that's what Volume 2 addresses. Number 4 also does not have blurbs. It does have Peg. I think I told you about this guy, right? Henry Chadwick. He wrote at least one, maybe 2 of the volumes of the Oxford History of the Church. And that's appropriate because, look, it is The Body and Society, Men, Women, and Sexual Renunciation in Early Christianity by Peter Brown. This is the same Peter Brown that wrote the very, very widely received and still probably the best biography of St. Augustine of Hippo that has ever been written, which I think he published sometime in the late 60s. Peter Brown's still around, well into his 80s now. This book, I have not read most of the essays in here, but I will read you some of their names just to give you an idea of some of the stuff we're talking about. There's one essay called From Apostle to Apologist, Sexual Order and Sexual Renunciation in the Early Church. When You Make the Two One, Valentinus and Gnostic Spiritual Guidance. Walking on Earth, Touching High Heaven's Vault, Porphyry and Methodius. Daughters of Jerusalem, The Ascetic Life of Women in the 4th Century. And Learn of Me a Holy Ignorance, which is on Jerome. So it is, by my count, 19 essays, and they are lengthy essays because the book is nearly 450 pages. But I love Peter Brown, and I love anything that he writes. I read the Augustine biography probably 10 years ago and just fell in love with it. If you like the Confessions, if you love the Confessions like so many people do, you have to go read Peter Brown's biography of Augustine. It is absolutely seminally important and fascinating, and tells the story of a truly human man who is flaws and all, and it's just beautiful. It's beautiful. But these are some essays on his his specialty, which is early Christianity and the ideas surrounding it. The next three books I want to show you. Oh goodness, already 10 minutes in. It's a 3-volume set by another religious scholar. This scholar is a religious scholar, mostly late 19th century and the 20th century. And his name is Martin E. Marty. Here's volume 1. And this is volume 1 of a 3-volume set called Modern American Religion. And this is called The Irony of It All, which covers the years 1893 to 1919. I will read you the inside flap. In 1893, the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the World Parliament of Religions, brought together for the first time religious leaders from the United States and the rest of the world. Martin Marty sees this event as an expression of modern American religion, and here, figuratively following the participants to their various spiritual homes, he begins this 4-volume chronicle. Okay, I've only found 3. I only thought there were 3, but if there's a 4th out there, I don't own it. The first comprehensive history of 20th century religion in America. It is Marty's contention that religion in 20th century America was essentially shaped by its encounter with modernity. In this first volume, covering the years 1893 to 1919, he records and explores the diverse ways in which American religion embraced, rejected, or cautiously accepted the modern world. By aggressively advocating modernity or uneasily accommodating it, by self-consciously preserving older ways in the context of modernity, or by transforming traditions through a stance of anti-modernism, or finally, by attempting to pass beyond and through the modern to a more basic religious stance unaffected by it. Within this framework, he narrates the stories of individuals and movements that gave American religion its direction and character in the early part of the century. The progressivism of modernists, like William Rainey Harper, the blending of secularity and religiousness in works of, among others, Henry Adams, George Santayana, William James, and John Dewey, the combination of religion with ethnicity among Indian, Black, Hispanic, Asian, Jewish, and Catholic groups, the evangelism of such figures as Dwight Moody and Billy Sunday, the influence of Mary Baker Eddy, and the founding of the Church of Christ, Scientist. Throughout, Marty traces the irony that marked these decades in American religious history. However strenuously the individuals or groups of these times tried to influence religion, their achievements, as he demonstrates, were usually quite different than, and often the opposite of, what had been intended. Yet despite the contradictions between their intentions and results, these thinkers and actors decisively shaped the religious and secular worlds that Americans take for granted today. In greater depth and detail than has ever been done, the irony of it all tells the story of these worlds taking shape. And I won't read this part for volume 2 and 3, but Martin E. Marty is the Fairfax M. Cone Distinguished Service Professor of the History of Modern Christianity at the University of Chicago. That is volume 1. Volume 2 is called The Noise of Conflict, and it takes us through the interwar years. And I guess, the interwar years for the United States, and I guess the first couple of years of the war for Europe. Familiar cultural icons, Norman Rockwell's depiction of American life between the two wars, are dominated by peaceful scenes of family life, white chapels, and little red schoolhouses. Contrary to these quiet images, Martin E. Marty shows that not since the Civil War had America been so divided by conflict. Religion was the prime agent in this unusual war waged with human voices, a war virtually free of bloodshed, a war of each against all, left versus right, fundamentalist versus modernist, Christian versus Jew, Protestant versus Catholic, white versus black. In this second volume of his acclaimed Chronicle of Faith in America, Marty looks at old stock Protestants who, fighting to hold their place, remained the dominant but declining core culture. Politically, this era was marked by the Red Scare, prohibition, issues of immigration control, and the Depression. Extremists vied for dominance. The Ku Klux Klan, nativists, and anti-Catholic opponents of presidential candidate Al Smith. Meanwhile, two fissures appeared inside Protestantism, first between fundamentalists and modernists, later between liberals and realists. Marty suggests that America was held together by its crisscrossing oppositions. Loyalties were interwoven in such a way that coexistence was possible. In America's richly pluralistic society, there was no clear targets of rebellion, and a shot at the opposition would be a strike against a spiritual cousin. Jews were both management and labor. Catholics were both Republican and Democrat. Protestants were divided by denominations, yet could come together on selected issues. Today's America was decisively shaped by the controversies of the period between the two world wars. Some of those conflicts have virtually ended. Others, such as the continuing legacy of fundamentalism versus modernism, sunder the nation's political life. The noise of conflict tells the riveting story of how America has survived religious disturbances and culturally prospered from them. And the last book of what I thought was a trilogy, but is apparently a four-parter. I'll have to go look for part 4. This is Modern American Religion, Volume 3, Under God Indivisible, from 1941 to 1960. In this third volume of his acclaimed Chronicle of Faith in 20th Century America, Martin E. Marty presents the first authoritative account of American religious culture from the entry of the United States into World War II through the Eisenhower years. This is the story of the years 1941 through 1960, when, as Marty shows, agents of conflict during the contentious 20s and 30s turned their energies to the creation of continuity in common life. Marty explains how religious organizations attempted to satisfy the need for national unity during World War II, as they later provided common symbols and energies during the Cold War. And throughout the 1950s, with the suburbanization of so much of white America and other cultural changes, many citizens, Marty argues, embraced the rhetoric of ecumenicism and consensus. With an eye always on the degree to which these trends masked counter-forces of dissent, Marty follows the currents of national and religious cohesion from the struggle to overcome religious pacifism following Pearl Harbor to the revival of interest in civic religion during the Eisenhower years. Under God Indivisible is the first book systematically to address religion and the roles it played in shaping political and social life in mid-century America. A work of exceptional clarity and historical depth that will interest general readers. Okay, so this one's only on the front flap, but I need to go find volume 4. So there we go. This is Martin Marty is a great American religious scholar. I'm familiar with his work, but I've never read these books. But of course, very much want to. Here is a book I think I've had for a long time. It was bought for me by someone I know. Oh, by the way, did I ever show you where these Martin E. Marty books were published by his own university, the University of Chicago? Okay, I think all 3 of them were, of course. So this is Emanuel Wallerstein, his book, The Uncertainties of Knowledge, put out by Temple University. The Uncertainties of Knowledge extends Emanuel Wallerstein's decade-long work of elucidating the crisis of knowledge in current intellectual thought. He argues that the disciplinary divisions of academia have trapped us in a paradigm that assumes knowledge is a certainty and that it can help us explain the social world. This is wrong, he suggests. Instead, Wallerstein offers a new conception of the social sciences, one whose methodology allows for uncertainties. Wallerstein is probably mostly known for something called systems theory, especially world systems theory. I can't tell you too much about it, but I can link his name to to those three words. And I have read one or two maybe books by him before. It's been so long I couldn't really tell you what they were about. But he's another very well-known name, especially in political science and in peripheral topics. Two more. This is another great early 20th century historian. A name everyone should know, but I'm afraid maybe is probably only familiar to scholars of American history and not so much the common reader anymore. This is a book by Henry Steele Commager called The American Mind. The subtitle in very small print there is an interpretation of American thought since the 1880s. And the back is just a short little blurb. This is a book written out of a passionate belief in the staying powers of the democratic principles. In it, Henry Steele Commager examines the work of philosophers, clergymen, novelists, poets, journalists, magazine editors, sociologists, economists, political theorists, and statesmen, and reflects on the interpretations of other historians to interpret the American mind and the forces that made it. I knew Henry Steele Commager's name, having seen it in print several times, and when I saw this book for a song in Half Price Books, I think it was, I bought it. It's nice condition, and it's always nice reading something that's not hot off the presses. I think this was published in, 1950, it looks like. I love these, but unfortunately, whenever I can find them, they are so expensive. As you can tell. And this is from Borders, right? This is the Borders book price. That was the price in like 2010. So God only knows what it would cost today. But it was $45 a decade ago. And this is the New Oxford History of England, Plantagenet England, 1225 to 1360 by Michael Prestwich. Published, of course, by Oxford. And I don't think I told you where The American Mind was from. It is published from Yale University. Always remember after the fact to show you. This is a very, looks like a very, very comprehensive book with a wonderful bibliographic essay at the end. I'll read you on the back. Let's see. England of the Plantagenet kings was a turbulent place. In politics, it saw Simon de Montfort's challenge to the crown in Henry III's reign, and it witnessed the deposition of Edward II. By contrast, and as relief, it also experienced the highly successful rules of Edward I and his grandson, Edward III. Political institutions were transformed with the development of Parliament and war. The stimulus for some of that change was never far away. Wales was conquered, and the Scottish Wars of Independence started in Edward I's reign, while Cressy and Poitiers were English triumphs under Edward III. Beyond politics, the structure of English society was developing, from the great magnates at the top to the peasantry at the bottom. Economic changes were also significant, from the expansionary period of the 13th century to years of difficulty in the 14th, culminating in the greatest demographic disaster of historical times, the Black Death. Embracing politics and government, kingship, the structure of society, France, Scotland, and Wales, as well as areas such as the environment, management of the land, and crime and punishment, Michael Prestwich's magisterial survey cast the Plantagenet past in a new and revealing light. Man, I wish I could get my hands on every single one of these. They're so wonderful. I love Oxford history of pretty much anything. But there you go, 10 books from University Presses in just under 26 minutes. I will see you next week. Bye.